Okay, Assalamu alaikum, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everybody to an amazing Saturday session, the last session of Ramadan, sadly. It's incredible. I can't believe we're already at the end, almost to Eid. I was just thinking about the gifts that we got here during the month of Ramadan. Alhamdulillah. We finished Surah Al-Nisa, we finished Surah Al-Mujadala. Tonight, inshallah, we'll finish Surah Munafiqun. We launched the Prophet's Pulpit and Usuli Press. I hope you guys have all had a chance to get your copy. If not, please do. Amazing Eid presents. I designed a t-shirt, The Intellectual Revolution Has Begun. So if anyone wants one, email me. They're about $25. We'll send them to you at cost. I'm just, alhamdulillah, so grateful. And so I'm making other cool merch too. So I'll let you know as soon as we get more. But anyway, alhamdulillah, so much to be grateful for. I took a lot of time last time, so I'm going to be really short today. I just wanted to share some really beautiful messages that I got. Alhamdulillah, I feel like I am getting more and more messages as people find Usuli. And like what really strikes me is, actually, let me tell this story. This week I went to the doctor with Mito, and it was a really nice Muslim doctor here in Columbus. We knew a lot of common people. We had talked about different things. He was not, before aware of Usuli. So anyway, we were talking about different things. And I was excited to see him again because I wanted to bring him a copy of the Prophet's Pulpit. And so I handed it to him, and he was very happy, very grateful. But he was like, oh, nice. Okay, a collection of khutbahs. And he, wasn't like exactly overwhelmed. He didn't really know very much about what we do here. But he was like, yeah, I like listening to Omar Suleiman on my way during Ramadan and listen to what he does. And so it kind of struck me like, oh, okay, well, if someone is happy with listening to khutbahs from Omar Suleiman and, gets a book of khutbahs, it's like, not that exciting a gift. So I thought, and I tried to say, well, I think what we do here is a little bit different. It's a little bit more advanced, but, I couldn't say very much, and I didn't want to really be annoying about it. So then, but it kind of like bothered me and it kind of stuck with me. And I'm like, okay, what do I say to someone who is perfectly happy with Omar Suleiman khutbahs? Because I know what we do here is very different. I've talked about, Yaqeen Institute and their approach and how I really believe like what we offer here is something like, much more than just nice platitudes. But anyway, I thought, okay, well, I should do a little bit of my own research. And so I decided to look up on YouTube and see what Omar Suleiman is talking about. And I watched a video where he was advising people about the 5 most important things that you should do during the month, during Laylatul Qadr. I left my phone over there. So from memory, they were something like, remember that the night begins with Maghrib. And be careful what you say, because if you say something wrong, you could lose that night with, before, it's right after dinner. You could be having a conversation and you could like make a bad joke, or you could say something that's really wrong and you would lose the evening. So remember, the night begins after Maghrib. And then the second was to make sure you pray, in Jama'ah, both, your night prayers and also Fajr. And then, several other things. And they were all like very ritualistic. And by the end, it was like the theme was not take the time, itikaf was not about, isolating to connect with God, but it was just to isolate and prevent yourself from sinning so you would lose the night. And I felt like, so much of what we talk about here is developing your relationship with God. And, the point of like, whether it's isolation or prayer or all of that is not to avoid sin so you ruin the evening, but so you actually develop your relationship with God. And so I felt like it was such a different message, and it was striking to me because I hadn't really listened to very much of Omar Suleiman. I mean, he's obviously a very nice man and, very well-intentioned and everything. So I don't mean this to say that there's anything, bad about him, but it's like a very different approach than what we do here. And like I, was mentioning to someone, I feel like what we give people is, not just a whole comprehensive view, but also tools. So like if you think about even the incredible khutbah that Sheikh gave yesterday, it's called, is your dignity founded in God or is it founded in your ego? And it's important because it's not just about a message, but it's also like tools, so these are like Sheikh was talking about, ways for us to even self-evaluate and check ourselves. Do you feel this way? Is your reaction this? If someone tries to correct you or tell you something, what is your reaction? These are like indicators for us that are extremely powerful, so that we can reflect and we have the tools in the empowerment to make a change ourselves. And so when we talk about even the way we approach like the surahs, and we learn that For example, Surah Nisa is where God is giving us a moral lesson, but then also the tools and, an example of how to apply them. It's like when that expression, if you give someone a fish, you feed them for a day, but if you teach them how to fish, you give them something for a lifetime. And I feel like that's the difference between what we do here and sort of like this idea of just avoid sin, don't ruin your night, do something very ritualistic and very like step by step, as opposed to here's a way to live your life, here's a way to check yourself, here are the tools so that you can be an elevated ethical person. And I think that that's really beautiful, and it's also really reflected in a lot of the messages that we've been getting. So the two messages that I want to share that were really special, among so many, and again, thank you to people who write and share with me. As I've said so many times before, we really have no idea how people are receiving this unless we hear from people, and people have been writing, and please forgive me for not responding very quickly because I'm just trying to catch up, but inshallah I will get back to everyone. So these are a couple of messages I got their permission to share. Salam, Grace. In this email, I want to send the Usuli Institute my gratitude and appreciation for all that you do. I became familiar with Dr. Abul Fadl and the Institute recently, and I feel relief that I am able to learn the true Islam. I feel that I can finally incorporate a sense of spirituality and connection with Allah in my healing journey. I live in Canada. I was, however, born and raised in a refugee camp in Iraq after my parents fled Iran during the Iran-Iraq War in 1979. I came as a government-sponsored refugee at the age of 14. My family has endured many hardships, having lived in refugee camps for 22 years. My father and other family members were also shot and injured in 2007 by U.S. soldiers in Kirkuk, Iraq, 2 days before my brother's wedding. At one point in my life, I viewed Ayan Hirsi Ali as a role model after reading her books because she shared some real stories of abuse which I could relate to. While growing up in the camp, I remember imams screaming during Friday sermons, telling the men, "Shame on you if you let your wives go to school," and so on. Thus, I grew up associating this type of rhetoric with Islam. Alhamdulillah, at some point, I was able to distinguish Islam from the abuse of women I have seen in my life and many other issues facing the Muslim community. There is so much suffering in certain parts of the Muslim world due to war, poverty, exploitation, etc., and yet our imams and educators focus much of their time on ritual. Dr. Abul Fadl is the first scholar that I have heard talk about issues of injustice facing Muslims in his sermons. He reminds us that Allah sees the injustice we face. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say how grateful I am to be part of the Usuli Institute community, and I hope to meet you in person one day, inshallah. May Allah bless you for all your efforts. Again, just, like the focus on ritual just doesn't help, and alhamdulillah when we get messages like this. This second message is also, to me, just encapsulates really the purpose of what we do here, and I hope you see what I mean. Salam, grace, inshallah. I hope these last days of Ramadan are blessed, full of God's mercy and forgiveness for you, Sheikh, and your whole team. And may God allow us all to experience many more Ramadans. First of all, the Prophet's pulpit is incredible. I'm finding it hard to put down and focus on work. My husband ordered a copy to share with our local library, and I plan to buy more copies to gift to friends. I wish every Muslim in the world would not only read it, but really internalize its profound messages. But that's not why I'm reaching out. I wanted to share with you the feeling of empowerment I feel right now thanks to the Sheikh's work. I think for the first time ever, I truly feel confident that Islam is a beautiful moral faith, and I do not feel apologetic whatsoever. I wanted to share how I came to this realization. Today I saw a comment on Facebook under a post bashing religion in general. The comment essentially said, "Yeah, Muslim beliefs are so degrading to women and gay people to the extreme." Usually I read something like that, roll my eyes and move on. But for some reason I felt like, no, I need to stand up for Islam. That is wrong. The narrative is wrong. If I won't say something, who will? So I responded with this message. That is not what Islam teaches at all. Any individual who has these beliefs completely misunderstands the moral message of Islam, which stands for equality, justice, and empowerment of the disempowered. The problem is not with the religion, it is with the human interpretive agent who views the religion through their own hateful, bigoted, and misogynistic lens. They predictably replied that some Muslims force women to wear the veil, ban women from voting, blah, blah, blah. So I replied, sadly, that is true, but again, that is not a reflection of the true teachings of the religion, but of the individuals corrupting the religion for their egoistic purposes. But yes, out of almost 2 billion Muslims, some are ignorant, just as is the case in all faiths. After I had this exchange, I sat with myself, and it dawned on me that I have complete confidence in what I said and complete confidence that what he said is dead wrong. That confidence, that certitude, that has come from listening to hours upon hours of the Sheikh's halakas and sermons that have brought the Quran to life for me, has allowed me to not only love my faith more deeply, but to feel empowered to defend it unapologetically. There aren't words to thank you and the Sheikh for that gift, but inshallah, I will show my gratitude by persevering on this path of certitude and empowerment and never again feel even a seed of doubt about what Islam stands for. Anyway, I got a kick out of that reflection and thought you might too. Oh my God, I was in tears reading that, and alhamdulillah, that like, what is a better gift? What is the whole point of what we're doing? And then to help even one person find certitude and beauty and confidence in their faith, empowerment in their faith. And so, I mean, that just encapsulates it all. And I hope, inshallah, if you're just starting with us on this journey, or if you've been with us for a while, that inshallah you will also reach that, because what more could you ask for? And to receive a gift like that during Ramadan, it was truly another Ramadan gift. So anyway, may all of you, inshallah, find your faith and beauty and confidence and certitude in what we're doing here, inshallah, if you don't already have it. And, inshallah, I just wanted to wish everyone a beautiful Eid and Ramadan. And I'm so excited for another session. Thank you for joining us.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي يا رب العالمين. Inshallah, today is Surah Al-Munafiqun. Okay, before we jump into Surah, let's again, as usual, just situate the Surah first a little bit. There are reports that tell us that Surah Al-Munafiqun, according to these reports, were revealed after Surah Al-Hajj, which is quite implausible, because Surah Al-Hajj was quite late in the Medina period. Surah Al-Hajj it's not very likely that Surah Al-Hajj was revealed before at least the sixth year of Hijrah. While Al-Munafiqun, some reports say that it was revealed shortly after Uhud. If so, then it would be the third year Hijrah, maybe the early fourth year of Hijrah. While other reports say that it was revealed around the time of Ghazwat Banu al-Mustaliq, which we'll talk a little bit about. And if this is the case, then either Ghazwat Banu al-Mustaliq took place earlier than what most think. So either this Ghazwa took place around the fourth year of the Hijrah, or Ghazwat Banu al-Mustaliq took place in the sixth year of Hijrah, and Surah Al-Munafiqun was revealed around the sixth year of Hijrah. in all cases, I think it is fairly unlikely that Al Munafiqun was revealed after Surah Al Hajj. I think that it was probably revealed before Surah Al Hajj. As we will see in the course of our discussion, um, is it was it revealed shortly after the Battle of Uhud? Um, I don't think so, for a variety of reasons. I think that the likelihood is, in fact, that Surah Al-Munafiqun was revealed around Ghazwat Banu al-Mustaliq, around that time, or even perhaps during that time. Um, but I do believe that Ghazwat Banu al-Mustaliq is not as late as many sources claim it was. That Ghazwat Banu al-Mustaliq did not take place in the sixth year of Hijrah, but it is likely that Ghazwat Banu al-Mustaliq took place in the fourth year or the fifth year of Hijrah, either late fourth or early fifth year of Hijrah. Um, we even have uh, an interesting report. I don't remember who was it that narrated it, that Surah Al-Munafiqun was revealed around the time of Ghazwat Tabuk, which is very unlikely because Ghazwat Tabuk is too late for Surah Al-Munafiqun. Now, it's interesting because the message, although this is an example of a surah, it's fairly short, obviously, but it's an example of a surah that refers to historical events in the very text of the surah. So the surah itself is referring to historical events. So by doing so, the surah itself situates itself historically. But at the same time that it does that, the message of the surah is transcendental. It transcends historical circumstance, transcends historical events. Um, it is indeed, as we will see inshallah, so transcendental that I think that this is in part why the the confusion that we get, where some say it was revealed right after Uhud, some say it was revealed uh, around the, right after Surah Al-Hajj, which would be, as I said, very late. Others say, well, it was revealed around the time of Tabuk. Others say that it was revealed around the Banu Mustaliq, Ghazwat Banu Mustaliq. You even get some that claimed that um, Surah Al-Munafiqun was revealed after Ghazwat Al-Ahzab, um, and so on and so forth. Uh, This, and when you, I think this will become apparent, inshallah, as we talk about the message of the surah. But when you see how remarkably transcendental the message is, uh, the problem with nifaq is endemic. Um, problem with hypocrisy is endemic. Nifaq is hypocrisy, obviously. And indeed, there is a diagnostic element in Surah Al-Munafiqun about the dynamics of hypocrisy and hypocrites. Hypocrisy is so common that it is as common in human beings as is lying, whether lying to others or lying to the self, because hypocrisy itself is a form of deception. If you pause and think, all human beings engage in a level, some degree of lying in their lifetime, whether lying to others or lying to the self or both. And most certainly, all human beings, or I should say, all believers, have elements of hypocrisy because they're elements of dishonesty, a degree of dishonesty. But yet, like dishonesty and hypocrisy, both hypocrisy and dishonesty are from shaitan. They're not godly elements, they're demonic elements. They're shaitani elements. And it is like toxic substances in the body. As long as your body can cleanse and rid itself of toxic substances, actively fighting the buildup of toxicity within the body, you remain healthy and living. If you become incapable of cleansing yourself of this toxicity, in other words, of fending off the hypocrisy, because you've become very adept at lying to yourself or lying to others, deceiving yourself or deceiving others. You don't deceive God. There's, you know, but it is, and hypocrisy is also this element. And subhanAllah that we're doing Surah Al-Munafiqun after yesterday's khutbah, because it's this element of um, lack of Iman. It's a contradiction, a flaw in Iman. You know, when Allah tells you that, as the Prophet ﷺ taught, that all human beings are equal in Allah's eyes, except by their Iman. It is indeed, how do I put this? Declaring one's Iman, even your intellect telling you that for whatever reasons, whatever the circumstances in your life that led you to say to yourself and to others, I am a believer. And you could very well be very sincere about this. But the perfection of Iman is for your heart to be in sync with your intellectual um, declarations, with your intellectual assertions. And for the heart to be in sync means an actual relationship with Allah, as the khutbah that I was talking about yesterday, that where you, your desire for izzah, your desire for your sense of pride, in other words, um, your sense of what makes you feel elevated as opposed to deflated, is truly and it's thoroughly a whether Izzah belongs to God as opposed to belong to you. So the normal dynamic is that there are so many human beings say we believe all the time. But what is much, much harder is to get your heart and soul to actually line up with your declared beliefs. That is why human beings could say, yeah, I believe in that Allah decides what harm or good befalls me, but yet when harm befalls them, they become sad. It's a discrepancy between their intellect that tells them that I believe in God and the heart that actually mirrors what the intellect, what the avoided declarations of the intellect are. And so that heart, that impulse of Iman, where the relationship with Allah is personalized and intimate, um, and where it makes you, because of that personalized relationship with Allah, it makes you stand out with Allah. So that's the whole notion of all people are equal in Allah's eyes. You're all equidistant unless you draw closer and unless you build a relationship that is. And this, if subhanallah, again, I didn't think would be, or I didn't know that we'd be doing Surah Al-Munafiqun when I gave the khutbah yesterday, but it's really interesting that if your izzah, if misplaced, pride, if misplaced, your sense of ego, if misplaced, it will always stand as an obstacle in this relationship between you and Allah. So many people have committed themselves to the journey of reaching out to Allah only at the end to discover that all they've really committed to is to worship their own ego and their own pride. And Surah Al-Munafiqun, it's short, but it is powerful and poignant because it reaches into the heart of this matter and tells us something about this troublesome, eternal, entrenched challenge of nifaq, challenge of hypocrisy. This Surah Al-Munafiqun is a good example of how understanding the historical narrative helps, but getting stuck at the historical narrative, in other words, not thinking beyond the historical narrative actually hurts because you miss the point of the surah if you are just simply um, re- wed Surah Al-Munafiqun to the circumstances or the historical circumstances of the surah. Okay, so first, something a word about a bit of the historical narrative. Maybe so. There are basic elements that we find common with a considerable amount of variations, but I'll stick with the and I'm sure I remember things here and there as we. Okay. Um, all right. So we already know, we've already talked about in several occasions how the challenge of Iman is that there are a number of figures, the most famous of whom is Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Abi Salul. Um, but there are others. I mean, there are like Wajd bin Qais, Mu'tab bin Qushayr. Um, there's someone else that was on the tip of my tongue. He'll come to me. Um, Dakhsham. What was his first name? Dakhsham. I'm pretty sure it was Malik bin Dakhsham. Anyway, so these they are all people of position within Madinian society that, to different degrees and extent, have people that are influenced and swayed by their opinion. Of course, someone like Abdullah ibn Ubay is far more influential than, let's say, Malik bin Dakhsham. Just his circle of influence is much wider. But what is common to the consistent dynamic that we see is those who say we believe, but when it comes to accepting, in our language, in our modern language, accepting the lifestyle changes that embracing Islam involves, when it comes to altering the rhythm and philosophy of their life, that's where they have serious difficulties. They say they took their shahada, they say they believe, they even show up for prayer. Allah knows, because Allah tells us that they're not very enthusiastic about prayer. It's not exactly they running to do their salah with the Prophet ﷺ or with the others. But they make it. And importantly, and we've talked about this again, that they are not, it is not like often you are, when you're a kid and you're told about the hypocrites of Medina, ill-educated teachers allow you to think that the hypocrites were in a sort of a Hollywood style, sitting, conspiring, being obnoxious and nasty and public. The entire problem is that it's a fluid dynamic that, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that some people drift into hypocrisy and out of hypocrisy between night and day. That hypocrisy is to the extent that your actions reveal that you're a hypocrite. Yeah, you could show up in prayer every day, but your mind is elsewhere. Uh, you could show up to prayer every day, but the minute there is something that you think can stand out as a good excuse for you to bail out, you jump on the opportunity and you're very happy about bailing out. So, and this is the consistent dynamic. And if you remember, in the what sort of leads to an escalation that is referred to in Surah Al-Munafiqun itself, is that you remember after the Battle of Uhud, the, there is, or in the events leading up to the Battle of Uhud, there is 1/3 of the army withdraws from battle midway and basically says, "This is a lost battle. We're not going to fight it," and they pack themselves up and they return to Medina, and that this faction was led by Abdullah ibn Ubay. Now, Abdullah ibn Ubay, who, and I think we've talked or mentioned this before, Abdullah ibn Ubay in particular, before the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina, was posed to be declared the leader of Medina. And in other words, he was just in position to become the leader of Medina when both, even his tribe, decided to alter their plans and to instead give their allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ, and Abdullah ibn Ubay was denied his leadership position because of that. But Abdullah ibn Ubay was a prideful man. He liked to be special. He liked to stand out. And if he was not treated as special, he would lash out, to put it simply. And so, among his habits was that when people would gather for Jum'ah, often people would gather even for any event like Eid prayers or, according to some reports, even Taraweeh prayers, whatever. He would always stand around and sort of make a theatrical, perform a theatrical act, where he, after everyone has become seated, everyone's seated, he would point to the Prophet والسلام, and say, "Here is your Prophet from Allah. Make sure you honor him and you treat him well." And now, ostensibly or outwardly, it looks like a what's the word I'm looking for? It looks like a warm gesture, right? The once upon a time recognized leader of, or the potential leader of Medina, um, stands there and sort of, when everyone is wants to make sure that his people, the Ansar, the natives of Medina, are recognizing the special position of the Prophet ﷺ, and so he makes this gesture of saying, "I present to you your Prophet. Um, make sure you, but make sure that you listen to him and obey him, and so on." Now, the Muhajirun, the people of Mecca, politely endured this act of gesturing on part of Abdullah ibn Ubay, meaning that they thought it's corny in our modern language. Why do we need you to sit there and sort of appoint yourself as officiating? But they also seem to have understood that he's a vain man, and if they tell him stop doing that, that this will become drama. It will become sort of a melodrama. The problem, though, is that, and here the sources will often tell you, as often when you read medieval sources. Medieval sources are very they in the medieval world, structure is highly valued, and when writing history, and ambiguity, vagueness, the the recorder of history would try to resolve ambiguity to the extent as the recorder can. And one of the earmarks of the Islamic civilization is that the person who's recording history, when they would give up on resolving ambiguity, they would give you just list a range of narratives and leave it up to you. Why am I saying that? Because a historical narrative, uh, in a lot of sources, they give it a sort of a structured form, in that he's doing this, he's doing this, he's doing this, until Uhud takes place, and he withdraws with his forces, and at that point, a man called Zayd ibn al-Arqam tells Abdullah ibn Ubay, "Sit down, we don't want to hear you anymore." In other words, after Uhud, when he withdrew with his one third of the army, Zayd ibn al-Arqam says, "You're fake. You, after having betrayed us like this, betrayed the Prophet ﷺ like this, and betrayed us, you want to stand there and pretend like you're telling us, I present to you your Prophet? Shut up. Just sit down." But of course, if you are reading your history carefully, there is a gap between the Battle of Uhud and the Battle of Banu al-Mustaliq. We are told that the events that precipitated Surah al-Munafiqun took place around Banu al-Mustaliq. So how could it be that he's told to shut up and sit down, but it continues brewing until it explodes around the time of the Battle of Banu al-Mustaliq? what is more likely from the variety of historical sources is that it was a gradual process. Everyone, or increasingly, people saw what he did as sort of theatrical and or about his pride. No one appointed him to this officiating role. And although he offered it as a gesture of, like, I'm helping. See, I'm supporting the Prophet. But here's the thing: was it really about supporting the Prophet, or really about his own pride and his own ego? And it is clear that even his own tribe, Al Khazraj, start increasingly getting tired of Abdullah ibn Ubay and his people, their double talk, and the fact that they on the one hand they say, yeah, we're Muslims, we believe, we're with you in the cause, but on the other hand, their value system resists the test of your value system, to put it bluntly, is that to what extent are you willing to sacrifice? That's the test of your value system. It's easy to say, I believe. It's easy to, as long as belief props you up, it's consistent with your lifestyle, it's consistent with your self-narrative. That's all easy. The crux of the matter is, to what extent are you willing to sacrifice? So you have, like, the Muhajirun, the biggest test is that they sacrificed their entire longing and for Mecca, and adopted this new home, adopted this major sacrifice of the Hijrah itself. And the Ansar are now presented with a different type of challenge, and that is the changing of the character of their native country, which now they are sharing with the migrants, the Muhajirun, and sharing with the influx of converts from outside Medina. So why do people like Abdullah ibn Ubay or Wajd bin Qais and so on, why are they seen as hypocrites? Is because in our language today, they bitch and complain. They're unhappy about the presence of the Muhajirun. They're unhappy about the influx of converts, many of whom are not from influential tribes or classy or rich or whatever. And while they are with the Prophet ﷺ, they are fine. When they go away, they complain. Okay. So then what's the next stage? Well, the next stage is there's a tribe called Banu al-Mustaliq. It's not an influential tribe, but it's a sort of a tribe that the narratives about it is that it seems like it lived off highway robbery and raiding caravans and so on. And Mecca had, for special terms, Mecca had struck with them a deal a long time ago that they don't raid Mecca in caravans. In return, Mecca gives them these special terms when they, whatever they've raided from other tribes, they come to Mecca to sell it. Mecca gives them special terms and gives them access to the the particular markets, because Mecca had a whole range of markets, and the markets were like big events. I mean, markets were not just like an open market that's open all the time, 24 hours, 7 days a week. Markets were events, and they were major events. You know, there would be the entertainers, there would be the poets, there would be the dancers, there would be the alcohol, there would be the, and there were major events. And getting terms in these major events is a very big deal. Location is a very big deal. Like where you get to set up shop, um, whether everything from even like how high the stage you're on to offer your material, or uh, even the reputation of the trading stall you're in, whether it's someone famous of such and such tribe used to own the stall in the past, and then now you get to sell from the stall. So everything mattered. And so, anyway, Banu Mustalaq had, but then the Prophet ﷺ, who, especially after the Battle of Uhud, is aware that so many Arab tribes are thinking to himself, well, if Muslims are defeated, maybe it's a matter of time before they can add. Defeat always emboldens your enemies. Defeat always is a boost to your enemies, as it is a strike to your morale. So the Prophet ﷺ gets wind through the network of spies that he has, that Banu al-Mustalaq are organizing to wage a raid. And then whether it was in coordination with Mecca or not, I mean, probably Mecca knew and did coordinate, but they were, and so knowing that if he waits around until they allow Banu Mustalaq to attack first, they are at a defensive disadvantage. He organizes a unit that strikes against Banu Mustalaq and defeats them first. Um, okay. Now, however, in this, in the events leading up to this short-lived battle, there are a couple of things that, and again, I mean, I'm when I'm pause or hedge, it's because there is just so many different narratives that, um, but so I'm if I synchronize between these different narratives, there is clearly something that transpires, something that happens that creates tension between the Ansar on the one hand and the Muhajirun on the other hand around the Battle of Banu Mustalaq. A lot of the narratives tell you that they start fighting over water, a well, spring of water, and that um, that a man called Sanan bin Wabar, Sanan bin Wabar al-Jahani, that Sanan bin Wabar al-Jahani, who is an Ansari, uh, gets into an argument with a man called Jahjah bin Sa'id al-Ghafari. Um, Sanan is the Ansari, and Jahjah is the Muhajiri. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so Sanan is the Ansari, and Jahja is among the Muhajirun, in other words, Meccans. So one of them strikes the other. And at that point, Sanan calls upon the Ansar, to come to his aid, and Jahjah calls upon the Muhajirun to come to his aid, and they nearly go to blows. And when the Prophet ﷺ, of course, intervenes and says, "What are you doing? You're returning to Jahiliyyah," and resolves the fight, or resolves the dispute between uh, the skirmish, or the fight that took between the two. But again, purportedly, when the news that a skirmish has taken place between the Ansar and Muhajirun reaches Abdullah ibn Ubay, um, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the finish the main narrative, and then introduce some variations on it. Anyway, so when the story reaches Abdullah ibn Ubay makes a statement that says, finally, to the effect, finally, this is, he sees in this it's not an omen, because from his perspective it's good news, that the whole episode of Muhajirun being in Medina, and it's about to lift. And he says what is a statement that is very widely recorded. Um, والله إذا رجعنا إلى المدينة ليخرجن الأعز منها الأذل. That if we return to Medina, now is the time that the honorable ones, by that he means the natives, will finally kick out the refugees. Al-Azal, or the lower people, the lower caste people, meaning the refugees, i.e. the migrants. And that stories tell us that this statement, this offensive statement, that finally we're going to kick these losers out of Medina, reaches the Prophet ﷺ. Now, why do I say variations on the theme? Because many narratives tell us that no, it wasn't exactly that. It was that after the Ghazwat Banu al-Mustalaq and the fight between the Muhajirun and the Ansar, and the Prophet ﷺ intervening to resolve this fight, that people knew that hypocrites like Abdullah ibn Ubay had fueled the fire of the fight that took place between the Ansar and Muhajirin. That they were constantly, griping and complaining and so on and so forth. And that as a result, when Abdullah ibn Ubay would stand at Jum'ah, or whenever Muslims would gather and say, "Here, I present to you your Prophet," people increasingly started to yell at him to shut up and sit down. That people just got tired of the theater. And that thereupon Now, some narratives tell us that Abdullah ibn Ubay simply said at that point, not simply, but by just him, started telling people, stop helping out the refugees, the muhajirun. Stop aiding them financially, because if you stop aiding them financially, they will leave. They will choose to go to another town other than Medina. And that Abdullah ibn Ubay didn't stop there, but even went further and said, in fact, they are exactly like a dog that you feed until that dog eats you. سمن كلبك يأكلك. It's an idiomatic statement. It means you feed your dog until your dog becomes so strong or powerful enough to eat you. And that he said that about the muhajirun. And that when again this reaches the Prophet ﷺ, Abdullah ibn Ubay swears up and down that I didn't say any of that and that it's a lie. I didn't utter any of this. I think that that's not precisely it's too, again, in medieval narrative, everything is like bracketed in very structured, well-ordered fashion. I think what is likelier in terms of historical narrative is that clearly people, not just with Abdullah ibn Ubay, but the theatrics of people who say we believe, but are not with the program and are constantly, remember that they would, as we know from elsewhere in the Quran, that they would often come to the Prophet ﷺ with personal excuses as to why they can't go out on jihad. Oh, can you excuse us from this ghazwa? Can you excuse us from this? Can you excuse us from that? So the whole idea of their involvement with their own selves, their entire narrative of being constantly complaining about how much they're asked to sacrifice, and how much they are asked to bear. It's unreasonable that we have to keep taking in all these refugees and all these people. We used to in Medina have barely enough for us, and now we have all these people that came from Mecca and all these converts that are coming from all over Arabia and so on. And I do believe that at some point, because it's reported too broadly and by too many sources for it not to have been the case, that at some point, for some reason, Abdullah ibn Ubay made the statement that eventually we will get rid of the riffraffs. And he did say, so لَيُخْرِجِنَّ الْأَعَزُّ مِنْهَا الْأَزَلِ, that eventually we will get rid of the riffraff. But the thing is, I don't believe that Abdullah ibn Ubay was the only person who said, stop helping them so that they will go away. Because we have numerous reports, sometimes attributed to Abdullah ibn Ubay, sometimes attributed to the other people who were identified as hypocrites of Medina, and it is a consistent narrative after Uhud, and a narrative that builds up incrementally, perhaps reaching a crescendo around Ghazwat Banu al-Mustaliq, and where the this class of people start saying, uh, لو كففتم عنهم لتحولوا عنكم. They start saying, if you just stop helping them, we've sacrificed so much, we've given up so much, and they start preaching to the circles of natives among them. Well, stop being so generous with the refugees, the riffraff that have come, and stop helping them, because if you stop helping them, لَتَحَوَّلُوا عَنْكُمْ, they would go away. And that, although it's attributed to different people, probably Abdullah ibn Ubay, it's consistent with his personality, to say something like, um, 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 سمن كلبك سمن كلبك يأكلك or سمن كلبك يفترسك, meaning that you statement to the effect that we see, it's like you're the dog that you feed until it's like the statement, you bite the hand that feeds you, but here it's like the anyway, it's the same idea, right? Okay. And this clearly reaches the Prophet ﷺ. And when every time the Prophet confronts whether Abdullah ibn Ubay or any of the other individuals who were implicated in this, they would assure the Prophet, whether they would swear. Abdullah ibn Ubay seemed to always swear a lot. He would say Wallahi, Wallahi, and so on. But Mu'tab ibn Qushayr, for instance, would not swear. But he would assure the Prophet that this is a misunderstanding and that they're committed and that they're with him. And of course, you get the dramatic narratives about Umar ibn Khattab offering to chop someone's head off. And the Prophet would say, no, 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 calm down, Omar, we're not going to do that. Other narratives say it was Ali who would offer to chop someone's head off. These dramatized narratives, they're earmarks of medieval narrative more than a historical reality. I don't believe that anyone was going around chopping to lob head offs, especially when they got the message from the Prophet that that's not what he was willing to entertain. But the thing is, the Prophet ﷺ would confront them. They would assure him and swear to him and tell him, no, we're on board. But we go back time and again to the same dynamic of, this is too much. Why are we sacrificing so much? So it's this cycle of, and I'll show you why Surah Al-Nifaq, Munafiqun, tells us something that is quite earth-shattering and scary about Al-Nifaq. Is it Maghrib yet? Oh, in 1 minute? Okay, Maghrib is in 1 minute. So we'll break our famous 10 minutes to break fast and pray Maghrib, inshallah. And 10 minutes, so don't go away. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Although this really belongs to if Allahu Alam, it's in Allah's hands. If we do the Sirah project, but okay, I'll give you a little bit although it really does belong to the seerah aspect of thing, but the Ghazwat Banu al-Mustaliq is also famous for another thing. It doesn't really have to do with the theme of nifaq, but it has to do with the historical events of Ghazwat Banu al-Mustaliq. Um, and that is the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ from Juwayra bint al-Harith. Um, I'm hesitating because I'm worried about this being a digression that's a bit too far. Um, but okay, so there you have two different narratives about Juwayra bint al-Harith. Juwayra bint al-Harith was a woman that belonged to the tribe of Banu al-Mustaliq, and her she was married um, to her cousin, and her cousin is killed in the battle of Banu al-Mustaliq. Her cousin, I think his name was Ibn Safwan. I forgot his first name. Anyway, so she is taken captive, and in the first report, or first cluster of reports, I should say, that consistent with the practice at the time, captives of war are enslaved, and she is enslaved by Thabit ibn Qais. And
We're having sound issues on this. We need to restart.
uh-oh, devil attack. السلام عليكم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد يا رب. We had a devil attack. We don't know why. Okay, maybe in the interest of time, I will.
Don't rush.
Okay, I won't rush, but I postpone the story of Juwayriya, as Rami reminded me. It's the more correct pronunciation of her name is Juwayriya. Anyway, I'll postpone the story of Juwayriya. Maybe we'll do it at the end, rather, so we can get into the heart of Surah Al-Munafiqun itself. So we set up the context. Now, let's see. So, the start of the surah gets to the heart of the dynamic. إذا جاءك المنافقون قالوا نشهد أن إنك لرسول الله والله يعلم إنك لرسوله والله يشهد أن المنافقين لكاذبون اتخذوا أيمانهم جنة فصدوا عن سبيل الله إنهم ساء ما كانوا يعملون. So the critical issue is that every time that these folks are confronted with the inconsistencies between their avowed belief, the statements of their beliefs, that they do everything outwardly, at least, to say we are one of you, but they are confronted with improper. And again, I think all of the narratives that we talked about are a bit. They're like little archaeological pieces of evidence, if you will, of the historical truth that is taking place. That whether they are complaining about how much the burden that has been imposed upon the natives from the incoming migrants, or when they go a step further and say, if we stop helping them, they will just go away, as Surah Al-Munafiqun itself tells us. That stop being so generous. And the evidence is that this type of argument that, or we embolden them because we have been so generous and so kind, so they've taken advantage of us. I mean, if you reduce it to its human terms, you find all of it relatable and natural. That they've taken advantage of us. Or even the crass statement that, you feed your dog until your dog gets to a point of being strong enough to attack you. All of it consistently, when they are confronted, they don't care very much about whether, I'm sure I don't forget it, whether Zayd ibn al-Arqam or Abdullah ibn Ubay, the son of the head of the hypocrites, Ibn Ubay himself, who was a good Muslim, converted and was actually a devout Muslim. They don't care whether they are believe them or not. They go around them and go to the Prophet ﷺ directly. Now, subhanAllah, again, I mean, subhanAllah that we get to Munafiqun right after Al-Mujadala. Because in Surah Al-Mujadala, and I forgot to mention this about Surah Al-Mujadala, one of the things that they say about the Prophet ﷺ is that they say he is udhun. Udhun meant someone who is easily swayed, can be influenced left and right. And in Surah Al-Mujadala, the surah says, Allah knows that you are saying that this about him. But indeed, this is only your own egos that think that you're deceiving anyone. You don't deceive anyone. The reason they sidestep those who confront them, like in this narrative where Zayd ibn al-Arqam goes to Abdullah ibn Ubay and say, how dare you say X, Y, and Z? The response is not to Zayd. The response is to go around to the Prophet directly. And the belief that, this Prophet, this man, when we assure him and we swear to him that we didn't say what we're accused of saying and that we are good Muslims, he believes us. All indications are, is that the Prophet ﷺ did not believe them. And the Prophet ﷺ knew exactly that they are who they are. But their own arrogance, their own ego, which, as we will see, makes them consistently misread the situation. And part of misreading the situation is indeed believing that they're fooling anyone. Most important of all is fooling the Prophet himself. So they, whether Halaf is someone who's constantly swearing like Abdullah ibn Ubay, or those who would just simply go and say, we didn't say what such and such person saying, they're lying, we now, in you find some interesting discussions about whether they knew, like when they would go and say, oh, these people are attacking us, and so on. I don't believe, as some have argued, that it wasn't a. Sometimes you actually believe your own lies, as we will see the allusion to this in the surah itself. That you have, shaitan has allowed you to deceive yourself so often that truly your Islam is nothing more than a thinly veiled camouflage for your own egoism and your own comfort zones. And like in Surah Al-Mujadala, we find again this allusion in Surah Al-Munafiqun to, in one qira'ah, اتخذوا أيمانهم, they have taken their oath, their shahada, as a junnah, and as we said, junnah is what you use to hide behind. Or as Al-Dhahak bin Muzahim in his says that in his qira'ah, imanahum, the اتخذوا imanahum junnah, that they've taken their faith as a camouflage to justify in a nutshell, they've taken Islam itself as a way of deceiving others. They've taken piety as a way of deceiving others. And although, especially when Muslim societies become very corrupt, although this is a very widespread phenomena, but it is also a grave sin against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to use Islam, and we've talked about this in Surah Al-Mujadala, but to use Islam, to use Islamic symbolisms, to use Islamic talk, to even say, as we'll see, to even say, well, I know what's in my heart, and because I know what's in my heart, then I immunize myself against criticism, which is a very common tactic, that you exploit the Islamic, what you know is part of Islamic theology, that there is no priesthood, that Allah truly knows what's your, but it is not that you're saying Allah knows what's in my heart because you have a relationship with Allah. You are using the the egalitarianism of Islam itself, to immunize yourself, to make yourself beyond reproach, beyond criticism. So you are not saying Allah knows what's in my heart and shuddering with, tremoring with anxiety at the notion that Allah truly knows what's in your heart, but you're actually asserting it in arrogance. You're actually asserting it to say, don't talk to me, don't reproach me, because Allah knows what's in my heart, and so I am untouchable. So now, فَصَدُّوا عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. So say as Muhammad Asad translates it as oath, and we've talked imanahum or imanahum, it's either made their faith or their oath a cover for their falseness, and they turn others away from the path of God. فَصَدُّوا عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Okay, what is the sudud here? If you think about it, yeah, in narratives that, someone could say, oh, don't help them and they will go away. Or, they became like dogs that we helped until now they're vicious against us. Or, yeah, that in part is the sudud. But think of the dynamic of hypocrisy itself. Because as we say that the what we rely on is not khusus al-sabab but umum al-ma'na, that we don't rely on, we don't limit the meaning of the text to the historical event, but we go with the language of the text in its generality. We rely on the generality that we read in the expression of the text itself. So think of the sudud here, an sabilillah. So on the one hand, yes, there is the sudud in the sense you are actually advocating what are subversive calls. But, and this is actually pointed out in numerous texts, that a society plagued by dishonesty, the real sin of the Munafiqun, is that they entrench in society a lack of clarity and the acceptance of dishonesty and double talk, that when they say things or they act in ways that raise serious questions, and then they go talk to the Prophet, and because the Prophet doesn't kick them out of Medina and the Prophet doesn't execute them, as one of the famous narratives is that when some it doesn't matter who, most of the reports say it was Omar, when the suggestion is made like, why don't we just put these people to death? And the Prophet ﷺ says, I will not have it said, it will not be the case that people get the message that Muhammad goes around killing his followers or killing his people. The fact that the Prophet refuses to take action against them, then they go back into society and weaponize that as somehow a tacit acceptance by the Prophet of their behavior, which is exactly what would happen. that, see, if we were really bad, wouldn't he have done something about us? He didn't. So if he's not complaining about us, why should you complain about us? The impact upon Medinian society of that was especially not with the you know the heart the old hands, the people that you hear about, that you would learn about in studying the Sirah as the close, strong, and faithful around the Prophet ﷺ. But Hadith al-Ahd bil-Islam, those who had converted, was one of confusion, because it requires a certain level. Either you are in the close proximity of the Prophet ﷺ to be in the know, so to learn that yes, the Prophet refuses to punish them, but that doesn't mean the Prophet accepts what they do, or that you would have a level of sophistication in terms of the way you understand morality and ethics, that that while they have not committed an offense that justifies taking criminal action against them, that does not mean that their behavior is not reprehensible. The difference between the application of criminal penalties and moral condemnation, that requires a level of sophistication. Well, a lot of the Bedouins that were converting in the vicinity of Medina to Islam did not have that moral sophistication. And indeed, the role of the Munafiqun, especially in the events that are going to lead to the very trying circumstance of Ghazwat al-Khandaq, is proving to be quite taxing. And that is precisely why, although we are, it's always, again, typical of medieval narrative, it's always packaged into, like, for instance, one of the narratives that you need is that first Omar goes to the Prophet and says, if you would only command me to strike the neck of such and such a person, I would. And so the Prophet would then say, if I would have commanded you, you would have done it? And Omar says, yes, I would have done it. Then comes the second person, and you have the same exact narrative takes place. If I would have commanded you, you would have done it? Yes, I would have done it. Then comes the third person. This is very typical of medieval narrative, this sort of staging of events. Now, the staging of events, though, represents a historical truth said in a medieval packaging. And the historical truth is that there are repeated complaints, repeated questions. Time and again, people are coming and saying, what do we do about these people? They're caught doing something wrong. We confront them. They go around us. They go to you. They swear that they are Muslims, or they tell you where we didn't do it, and you simply nod your head, or you say okay, and then they go around and say, see, and they use that to further confuse issues. So that's the real dynamic going on in society. And subhanallah, Surah Al-Munafiqun, we know that the Quran is capable, when it wants, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of naming names when Allah wants. And we know that there are individuals whose names were named. And we know, for instance, like when Allah talks to the Prophet about his companion in the cave, We know that this companion is Abu Bakr. We know when it says Tabbat yada Abi Lahab wa Tab, that he's talking about Abu Lahab. We know that when the Quran mentions the Prophet's adopted son by name, that Allah mentions is here. Surah Al-Munafiqun describes the dynamic but doesn't name names. It describes the dynamic, but it doesn't come and say X, Y, and Z are the people that we're talking about. And furthermore, look into the hadith literature. You will not find in the hadith literature a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, let me tell you who the Munafiqun are. But you will find many transmissions in which it is the actions of people that single them out in the inherited memory of the Ummah as the Munafiqun. In this, in itself, is a remarkable wisdom. Because if the point of the Quran was to solve a historical challenge confronting the Prophet, and that's it, then Allah would name the Munafiqun and we would all be done. And we'd like say have a list of the Munafiqun. Okay, thank you very much. Now we know who the pariahs are. But what would be served from that? What would be the lesson given to generations? The whole moral lesson is that you as a community and you as individuals learn to scrutinize, whether individually or collectively, who in fact uses faith as a camouflage for immorality, for lack of commitment, who is in fact says what they don't do. There is a huge discrepancy between their avoided beliefs and their actual actions. The value system that is affirmed through their behavior or lack of behavior. Now, the description of the munafiq is chilling. Look, وَإِذَا رَأَيْتُهُمْ تُعْجِبْكَ أَجْسَامُهُمْ. You get in the narratives again, typical, that the munafiqun, like such and such, they were, they had big bodies, and whether true or not, Allahu Alam, but. And then you would get in the tradition that they would sit during Jum'ah with their backs perched against the wall. If you've hung around Salafi circles, often they'll tell you during Jum'ah, don't lean back against the pillow or don't lean back against the wall. The genesis is from this, is the idea that, but these narratives, again, it's sort of where the medieval narrative reduces the textual narrative into a symbolic act, which is again very typical of. The point is that these people were تعجبك أجسامهم, they were unlike the people who were coming to this faith, often from one sacrifice to another, in a very gritty process of um, working for a cause. The people, this class of div- uh, this class of people, the hypocrites, are very much concerned with their appearance. And they invest a great deal in their looks. Their priorities are different. Their priorities are not, in fact, in fact, one of the major complaints that the Munafiqun had is that the Prophet is bringing the riffraff to Medina. One of their major complaints, and eventually they go and build a whole masjid because they are turned off by all the poor people that are praying in the masjid in Medina. So they want to build a masjid for the pretty people in society. The Munafiqun of the past would, in our day and age, they're the people that would love Park Avenue in New York and Beverly Hills in LA. They would find this their home. Their hearts are wedded to the appearances. And they don't see, if you do a deep dive in the Surah, the thing that strikes you is the extent to which all of those who eventually, in the collective memory of Muslims, become known as part of the camp of Nifaq, is the extent to which they just don't understand, or they don't quite buy, or they don't ever completely sign on to this egalitarian message of the Prophet, where, a person who's wearing rags probably never put perfume on in his life, leave alone can afford perfume, doesn't eat the type of delicacies that, or the and the, in desert environment, there are all types of expensive things that you buy to do things like to soften your skin and to, I don't want to gross you out, but one of the things that happen is like, dead skin accumulates on your feet. If one of the things that you can tell whether someone lives in luxury or not is that the if you go in and they remove the dead skin from your body, well, that's expensive. And the material you use in that to cleanse the dead skin of your body, including your feet, is expensive. And one way to be grossed out with people is to notice in prayer, you look at their feet and you see that at their heels there's like a good amount of dead skin, cracked and everything, and you say, "Oh, gross," but it's expensive. And so some of the remarkable reports that have always intrigued me is that the same people who are known as the Ashab al-Nifaq, is that they start complaining about the cracked feet and the dead skin on feet, and why are we exposed to having to look at these ugly feet all the time, and like chuckling myself as saying, oh, God, subhanallah, human beings centuries can go by, but they never change. These people belong in Beverly Hills if they lived in our day and age. So تعجبك أجسامهم, it's not as you often, it's not just, oh, it just so happened that this person was tall. What does that mean? It means, as it reads, that they, especially among the new converts and the people who are not, and even the poor people, they would look at them and say, wow, they're better looking than, meaning better dressed, better presented than the Muslims who are giving, all their wealth to support the war effort, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, so this is one thing. And quite often, what they say, if you have the wrong value system, so notice, وَإِن يَقُولُوا تَسْمَعْ لِقَوْلِهِمْ. If they talk, تَسْمَعْ لِقَوْلِهِمْ means what? That people would listen to them. It is not because Abdullah ibn Ubay, as some narratives claim, that he was eloquent. A lot of people transmitted what Abdullah ibn Ubay said. There's no sign that he was particularly eloquent. I mean, his whole thing about, some min kalba yakulak, that's not particularly eloquent. That's actually crass in terms of Arabic poetry standards. That's sort of crass to say that. Feed your dog, your dog will eat you. It's not a matter of that. No. What they said appealed to classes of people, and that's exactly why they were responsible for sudud an sabilillah, for turning people away from God's cause. Because what they said appealed to the most base and selfish parts of a human being. When someone comes and tells you, take care of yourself, don't, you've given enough. Oh, those people don't understand you. You're so important. You're so, puffs up your ego. And this is exactly what they did. And tells you that you've given enough and you should give no more. Yeah, so you listen to them. And that's precisely what. But then, look. So, it's like cheap talk that resonates with cheap people. Cheap talk that resonates with cheap people. كأنهم خشب مسندة يحسبون كل صيحة عليهم. Now, here is one of the most, the Quran often has these things that just make you pause and think hard and long. Al-Khushb al-Musannada is wood that is thick and not malleable. Like it's wood that's not particularly good for what do you call the person who makes like chairs? A carpenter. Okay, like carpentry. Okay, and wood that is thick enough that hollowed wood was valued because you can put stuff into hollowed wood. Thick wood that you can't hollow, so they themselves are like these stern pieces of wood that are empty inside. They can't. They have no space for Iman. They have no space for values. They're full of themselves. Like in our modern expression would say, they're full of themselves because they're full of themselves, literally. Okay. But al-khushb al-musannada also has an idiomatic meaning. When a person draws themselves, when a person carefully crafts their public appearance, they care very much about how they appear in public, and it is the end of the world for them if they're if the public appearance they put on is injured or fractured or scratched or disturbed in any way. They're constantly, in the same way that they care very much about their physical appearance, they also care very much, the khushu musanna, that they're like a uncompromising, unyielding public displays. They perform for their public perception. They don't care about what is inside their soul, exactly like this wood that can't be hollowed and you can't put anything inside of it. They're full, literally full of themselves, because they are all about how they appear in public. But what their true substance is something that doesn't concern them. But furthermore, people who are hypocrites, their heart are the heart of a hypocrite, and are always have several faces. The way they are in public is not the way they are in private. In public, they have a persona. In private, they're a completely different matter. And their public performance is what they live for. And it is the end of the world. They are very carefully try to engineer the circumstances so what is the truth of who they are, or what is known to them privately, is, and unless it feeds itself into the public performance, then they suppress it. Because of that, let's see how Muhammad Asad translated it. They believe, okay, so he says, appearance may please thee, and when they speak, thou art inclined to lend ear to what they say. We've talked about that. But they may seem as sure of themselves as if they were timbers. Well, it's not exactly. Timbers firmly propped up. They think that every shout is directed against them. So he translated it quite literally. What that means is, every shout is directed against them. That because they are fake, they're fake human beings who are constantly putting on a public performance. They are also obsessed with who is talking about them, who is against them, who exposed them. So يحسبون كل صيحة عليهم literally means that they become obsessed thinking that everyone is out to get them. And indeed, we know that the people that the collective memory of Muslims sort of identified as hypocrites, they're very, very keen on always keeping track of the rumors. Who went to talk to the Prophet? When did they go to talk to the Prophet? Did the Prophet mention our names? And they're constantly, whether someone actually complains about them or not, they're constantly convinced that they are the center of the universe of what goes on in Medina. In fact, they are constantly convinced that they are the center of. So they go to the Prophet والسلام, numerous times and try to find out what people are saying about them, what the rumors are about them. They go to him, often swearing up and down, assuring him of their loyalty, because they think that people have criticized them even when people haven't. That remarkable expression of the personality of a hypocrite. It is not, if you take this as a historical description of specific individuals and you stop there, then you've missed the entire point of the surah. Because I submit to you that what Surah Al-Munafiqun says about who's a hypocrite is in all of us. All of us, unless we are careful, have a public persona. All of us could be a khushub musannada. We could be as if pieces of unwielding wood, a mere appearance, empty of meaning. What we care about is the performance we put on, but truth, value, sincerity, all of us are subject to that paranoia and that obsession where we start thinking we are the center of the world, and that what matters is who says what about us, rather than purpose, cause, goal, substance, your relationship with Allah. It's a terrifying description of the nature of nifaq. Now, so this paranoia and this self-centeredness, add to this then another element. Again, the narratives tell us وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالُوا يَسْتَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ, that when they are told, come so that the Prophet ﷺ can, يَسْتَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ means what? In a lot of commentaries, you get the impression that they tell you a story also. That Abdullah ibn Ubay, when he said the statement about, if we go back to Medina, we'll kick out the riffraff. There are, again, different versions, but that Zayd ibn al-Arqam went and told the Prophet ﷺ, and a story that I don't believe personally, that the Prophet ﷺ didn't believe Zayd ibn al-Arqam. The possibility that the Prophet wouldn't believe Zayd ibn al-Arqam but would believe Abdullah ibn Ubay is practically nil, zero. Anyway, that the Prophet didn't believe the Zayd ibn al-Arqam until Allah came and vindicated Zayd. Again, I don't buy that. But that when Allah vindicated Zayd. People went to Abdullah ibn Ubay and said, okay, now it's clear that Zayd was saying the truth and you were lying. Go apologize to the Prophet and he will forgive you. And he refuses. And you read in a lot of sources that this is what is meant by تعالوا يستغفر لكم رسول الله. But again, this, I'm just giving you one of the many versions. Um, the issue is deeper than that. Is that when they are told to stop being so superficial and so self centered, to stop being hypocrites, in other words, and called to their conscience. Look at the لَوُّ رُؤُوسَهُمْ. They don't even, it's not that they say no, because that would be too obvious. If you say no, they turn away. What does that tell us? It tells us part of the characteristics of hypocrisy is not just self-centeredness and superficiality and paranoia, but on top of that is obstinance and stubbornness. When they are called to their conscience, it's not that they say no, they just simply avoid the entire situation. They walk away from it. Of course, in the books of tradition, you find a tradition where, a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, when they say asked about لَوُّ رُؤُوسَهُمْ, and then, he lifted his neck and then turned it to the right and said, this is what it means. But again, this reductionism, because you find modern teachers, they relate these medieval narrative as if the entire meaning of the Quran can be capsulized in the medieval narrative. The medieval narratives are attempts at approximating the meaning within the dynamics of the way that medieval people transmitted and communicated knowledge. But the meaning of the text is far more expansive than the mechanics of the medieval narrative. So the issue is not that they turn their head to the right or they're lifted, because I've had situations where someone says, well, you can't say lower ru'usahum because, I didn't raise my head and turned my head to the right. Okay, so you turned your head to the left. Does that make all the difference? The point is that you are resistant to advice. You are resistant to the call to your conscience. No one can talk to you about what's right and wrong because you consider yourself beyond that. What time is it? Okay, obviously we're not going to finish Surah Munafiqun tonight. Ramadan is ending, and the good news is my semester is also ending. We're in exam period, so inshallah I'm going to have more time in the summer. Inshallah. Should we stop here? To stop here? Stop here?
No. 24-hour holocaust. you
Sacrifice through the
but
night.
he hasn't eaten.
Uh, okay, we'll next halqa inshallah we'll finish Surah Al-Munafiqun and I'll tell you the narrative about Juwayriyah, and there are a few things that I forgot from Surah Al-Mujadala, so we'll do that inshallah. And not a few things, I mean it's actually one or two things, but yeah. And sorry for the double attack. And we're at the very end of Ramadan, so intensify your dua. It's Allah Alam where are we going to be next Ramadan. Okay, you want to come? And don't forget to remind them of Taraweeh.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Well, that's a cliffhanger. I thought we would finish tonight. I'm disappointed, but we can't rush. We have to do this right, and alhamdulillah. Next session we'll have a chance to do Q&A, and we'll have a chance to make sure we tie off loose ends from Mujadala and revisit this. This is such a powerful set of halakas. These last three have been so powerful because, especially, like you see people in these descriptions. And like I was saying in the beginning, when you have tools to recognize yourself or people it hits home so much harder. And again, it's like, this is the methodology, right? This is the way to live, the way to understand things. My fish example, it's like you can give someone a fish for a day. It's like you can answer a question and satisfy them for a day. But if you actually teach them to have a methodology, a way of understanding, a way to approach, a way to assess and self-reflect, it's so powerful. So I'm so grateful every time we cover these, and you feel like every time the Sheikh shares something that you recognize in someone around you or someone that just makes it so powerful and so vibrant, right? Like, this is vibrant Islam, and how we can then apply that. So we have Taraweeh. I want to share again, we actually had another Ramadan miracle. One of our community members, no, this is seriously, like, I can't believe this. Someone here has been training for a marathon. She ran a half marathon, 13.1 miles, while fasting today. And showed up to the halakha and broke fast with us, drank water for the first time. I mean, I would be dead. That is a Ramadan miracle, and it's an incredible accomplishment. So congratulations, Jana. It's amazing. So anyway, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
And her name is Jana.
Her name is, yeah. And yes, she's amazing. So anyway, and then she wore Free Palestine shirts as she was running, she and her family. So yes, even better. That's, yeah. So join us for Taraweeh. Everyone have a wonderful, Ramadan, last few days. Oh my God, Brian, you got your Usuli shirt. Alhamdulillah. If anybody wants an Usuli shirt, write me. We can also make sure you got one. Yeah, that's it. Anything else? Anybody else want to share? Okay. Thank you for being with us. You guys have a really blessed last few days, a wonderful Eid. And we'll look forward to seeing you very, very soon, inshallah. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Great to see you. Assalamu alaikum.